Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if it's your first time coming across one of my videos. And this is episode 5 of talks where I'm discussing how autism affects women. And when I'm referring to autism, I am actually referring to high functioning autism and what used to be known as Aspergers syndrome. I come at this not from a person with any professional medical expertise at all. This is purely based upon my own experience as a self-diagnosed woman with Asperger's back in the day. And my background is I am a lawyer, and I formerly was a registered social worker in the UK as well. And I have worked with adults with learning disabilities, learning difficulties, and with adults who have mental health problems. So that's the context really from which I am approaching this series of talks. So in this episode, what I'm basically going to do is just run through the signs specifically for women and to summarize what the diagnostic journey would be for those of you who feel you may be on the higher functioning autistic spectrum, whether you want to try out self-diagnostic assessment or whether you want to think about going and approaching medical health services, clinical services for an assessment from their clinical psychological perspective. So just to summarise the common traits and behaviours in high functioning women, excuse me, wow. The first thing to say is that recognising the signs of high functioning autism in adult women can be challenging, and this is due to the actual subtlety and the variety of symptoms that are not the same for women. So unlike the more overt behaviours that are often observed in high functioning autistic men, women tend to exhibit traits that are easily overlooked or mistaken for personality quirks. Understanding these common traits and behaviours is crucial for self-awareness and for seeking appropriate help for us. Many of us autistic women, we can exhibit high levels of empathy and emotional sensitivity. And this is contrary to the stereotype about autistic individuals in general, where there is believed to be a lack of empathy. For us women, we can often feel emotions very deeply and can be highly attuned to the feelings of others. This sensitivity can be overwhelming, and it can lead to emotional burnout and social fatigue. And what we find is that social interactions, especially in group settings, can be draining and anxiety inducing, and that can prompt the need for us to seek out solitude in order for us to recharge. Communication challenges are another hallmark specifically for autistic women that differ. We can struggle with the nuances of social interactions, such as reading other people's body language, understanding sarcasm, or maintaining the flow of a conversation. We may find it difficult to navigate small talk, and we can prefer deep, meaningful discussions. Our speech patterns might be perceived as very formal or pedantic, and we can have a tendency to talk at length about topics of interest, and sometimes we can miss social cues that signal disinterest from the listener. We can have an intense focus and passion for specific interests, and these are common traits for higher functional autistic women, I would say. These interests can vary widely from artistic pursuits to academic subjects, and they are often going to provide a deep sense of satisfaction. And we will develop quite a high level of expertise. However, there is a downside with these traits, because the intense focus can lead to difficulties in actually shifting attention to other tasks, which may be perceived as inflexibility or stubbornness to the observer. Our sensory sensitivities also play a significant role. Many of us autistic women are hypersensitive to environmental stimuli such as bright lights, loud noises, strong smells, or certain textures. And our sensitivities can cause discomfort and distress, and it can lead to avoidance behaviours or the need for our sensory accommodations like noise cancelling headphones or wearing soft, comfortable clothing. So that's just to really summarise what I have set out in episodes so far in terms of traits. And I have also said that in terms of sensitivities, because of the amounts of senses involved, I will actually do an episode on each one of those and try my very best to give as many examples as possible, because I do believe that it's really important, if women who believe they may be high functioning autistic, they need concrete examples of how behaviours they know they have or they observe in other people, what does this look like in reality? What are these examples? What are we looking for? So I think that's really important. So I will do that. But moving on now to looking at the types of self-assessment and the professional help that can be sought out. So recognizing traits in ourselves is the first step, okay? And that's why it's really important, as I said, for me to provide as many videos as I can on examples of the sort of traits in real time, in real terms, So many of us women come to the realization about our autistic traits through a sort of self-assessment tool, So, for example, the self-assessment tools that are available include the Autistic Spectrum Quotient, and in brackets AQ, and you can, obviously you could Google these. Or you have what we call the RAADS, that's RAADS-R, and that stands for Ritvo, Autism and Asperger Diagnostic Scale Revised, in brackets. Okay, so I will put these in the description, so don't worry about that. I'm not going to put links, because sometimes if you put links, they might not be available on that link anymore. So I will just put the description, and then you can Google the description, and that hopefully would lead you to websites where these tools are still readily available. So in essence, these tools provide a preliminary indication, okay, but they are not a substitute for a professional diagnosis, and it's important that I make that point. But upon recognising that you may have potential signs of high functioning autism, the next step is, for some, will be to seek out professional help. And depending on where you are, the first place you're going to do that would be your healthcare provider, who would sort of have experience in sort of diagnosing high functioning autism in adults more generally. Okay, so and it's really important, particularly for women, to identify professionals who are experienced in assessing women who are considering themselves to be on the higher functioning spectrum. Okay, so I mean, you can, if you're in the UK, where I'm based, you can go to your general practitioner, and usually, I mean, your general practitioner is the first port of call for most medical needs here in the UK. Obviously, it's going to be different if you're in the US or if you're in Australia. If you're in any other country, you obviously need to find out what your, what your health system provides for you. For some of you, that may mean that you have to have health insurance, and it might not be free for you to, like it would be in the UK, for example. If here in the UK, if you suspected that you were higher function autistic, whether you're a male or a female, and that was actually impeding your activities of daily living to such extent that you were sort of, not able to function effectively, you could more than likely get a referral through your GP, your general practitioner, to your local psychological services. Okay, but in cases where you may feel that you're able to function, you're not affected in that way as such. For example, you could be a career autistic, a professional autistic person is how I would describe somebody who is quite successful in a sort of elite profession, if I put it that way, like IT, medicine, law, technology, mathematics, sciences, engineering, in those sorts of professions where pay is good, and you do find a lot of professional autistic, higher functional autistic people in those industries. You will probably have to pay for yourself to get assessed. So I just wanted to sort of make that point. But generally speaking, in terms of assessment, you are looking at general practitioners, you're looking at psychologists, you're looking at psychiatrists who can specialize in neurodevelopmental disorders. Yeah, and that would be a good starting point. Okay. So for us women, we should be prepared to discuss our developmental history. We should be prepared to discuss our current behaviours, and we should also be prepared to discuss any specific challenges that we face. If you're going to have an assessment, especially if you're going to a professional, you want that assessment outcome to be as accurate as possible. So you will need to share your history, current behaviours, and any specific challenges that you face in your day-to-day life. Okay. The decision to seek a diagnosis can be quite daunting. I decided not to do it, which I'll do an episode on at some point. But I personally decided that I had suspected, and obviously I've got my mother, who I believed was a moderate autistic. And just looking at my family history, I just had enough information to become aware of myself sufficiently to want to sort of take the self-diagnosis to assessment online effectively. Was it online back in the day? I can't remember, because mine was, quite a while ago, long time ago. I think it might have been a book actually, and the papers that you need to sort of self-assess were in a sort of book form at that time, and I had ticked the markers, really more or less ticked sufficiently the number of markers that would indicate that I was Aspergers, and also evaluating my own narrative of my life, because that's really important for women, the narrative part, that explaining your experiences more than sort of check what, do you do this, do you do that, it's really sort of key, and I find that high functioning autistic women won't really struggle with this, because we are very deep thinkers, and we do we're very aware. In fact, we're over aware. Often we're over aware of the way we operate in the world, you know. So you might, if you've not sort of been observing yourself up to now, it might be a good idea to start with journaling your experiences as much as you can remember about your past when you were a child, right through to currently what your patterns of daily living are currently, you know. And again, I'll do an episode on that, because that might be very helpful for people to sort of list out, you know, what do I do on a daily basis? You know, what are my routines? What are my patterns? What am I aware of about myself and how I interact with my environment, and what is the impact of each interaction upon me? How does it make me feel? And looking at your social circles, how has your life changed over the years? Have you become more solitude like myself? That's certainly something I picked up, you know. But it was a relief for me. It was like a chip off my shoulder when I wasn't having to sort of socialise so much, you know. And I found that happened more as my children grew older, and obviously they had their own peer friendships. That, you know, when you're a parent, obviously you're responsible for integrating your children socially, and so in order to do that, you have to expose them to as many different environments as possible. You have to teach them how to engage in those environments in an appropriate way. So you're forced into social interaction with the wider world when you become a parent, if you want to do the best job possible, that is, you know, and if you are able to do so. And also, obviously, if you're in a career, when you're developing your career, whilst I have said in another episode that you can actually find yourselves in a career that is quite, you know, gives you a lot of autonomy, gives you a lot of alone time, doesn't require so much working directly with other people, that can be a real possibility for higher functioning autistic men and women alike, who are highly intelligent or on the intelligence scale. But at the beginning, with every career, no matter the industry, in most careers you go into, you are going to have to network, you're going to have to be friendly, you're going to have to be agreeable, you're going to have to learn the organizational culture, you know. So there is elements of yourself where you have to force yourself to develop strategies for building up your life profile, in essence, in the different ways that you will need to function, you know. Very much so, as a high functioning autistic, you have to do that, you have to learn this. And so the sort of autonomous side of this and the more solitude side comes with experience as you get older. Once you've more or less proven yourself, I would say, in your career, people can trust you, then you know what you're doing, they're going to use you, you can sort of get on with it, you know. And again, as I said, with raising a family, as your children get older, so forth and so forth, you know, less onus upon you being the one that has to lead them and teach them how to be in the various social interactive ways that they will need to learn and develop. They, you know, they sort of get on with it, don't they? You know, they don't actually want you around after a while. So again, that leads to less demand on you having to sort of be out at weekends, taking them here, taking them there, you know, all the small talk with other parents, you know, navigating school life, which can be really traumatic as well. And if you're in a divorce situation and you're co-parenting, all that becomes less stressful for the high functioning autistic woman as she meets his gets older, or a family gets older, and yeah, I think I've made the point anyway. So really, really, going back to what I was saying, so it's really important to look back at your history and what you were doing to cope in the various domains of your life, and to really think about, how much prep, what were you do, what was the amount of energy that you had to put into being able to navigate each domain on a daily basis. That is a huge database of information there, because you may not be doing, as I said, you may not be doing a lot of these things now because it's not necessary. Your life might be a lot more, you might be a lot more solitary, but for your diagnosis, for you to be sort of able to provide the information that's necessary, is really important that you develop this database if you don't already have it. And so definitely to get yourself a notebook, to sort of find time when you can sit down and just go through your childhood, really, your childhood as far back as you can, your teenage years, your early adult years, and all the different domains of your life, who you were with, how you used to do things, until you get to the point of today. And that's going to be so useful, so useful. I mean, I did mine when I think I was in my mid-40s at the time. And because I'm in my mid-50s now, but at the time when all this was coming to the fore for me, was around my early to mid-40s, I would say. And so I had a lot of information. I had a lot of information, and because this was something that was in my family, and that's another thing, your family history, when you are journaling for the purposes of developing a sort of history, backstory, your family, how your family interacted, think about individuals in your family. If you're sort of in the 40s upward age bracket, think about how your parents function. You could have a parent who is on the spectrum and not diagnosed. Have that discussion. If you think that you might have a parent, a grandparent, or anybody, any female in your family who you think could possibly also be on the spectrum, it would be really useful to have a discussion with them. I've certainly started discussing it with my two daughters, in recent years as well. So yeah, absolutely. I think going back, so that's very important. But as I said, the traumatic element of this can come into when you do have to revisit some of the past experiences you've had. It's going to be quite an emotional experience, especially if one of your traits is high sensitivity, and literally you could have sort of post-traumatic stress symptoms from some of your experiences that could be triggered. So again, just be aware of that, and what you might need to sort of comfort yourself, Once you've done that, if you've done the self-diagnosis and you want to go into sort of the professional, get a professional assessment, I imagine some women would find it really validating and liberating, actually. I mean, I didn't need to go that far, as I said, but I certainly felt a sense of relief. And now I have gotten to the point where, for example, on my social media profiles, I will put neurodiverse, that I'm neurodiverse. I will sort of hashtag high functioning autistic, and things like that. And again, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this channel, sort of trying to sort of find my new me, accepting my new me moving forward as a woman now, in her mid-50s, that still has a lot to give in life, still wants to sort of have a work towards an equally meaningful future as well as the past, having been divorced. But see, but still seeing, when I look at myself, I'm a beautiful woman. Seeing a beautiful woman who doesn't look her age, and yeah, in a nutshell. Anyway, I digressed. So what can you expect during an evaluation? So what they've said about this, and I've got this information because obviously I've never been personally through the professional diagnosis myself, but I have had, whilst I was working in mental health services, service users, people who are referred to the adult services, where there is a sort of multidisciplinary team of psychologists, social workers, OTs, speech and language therapists. They all form a team of sort of secondary medical professionals, health professionals, who would be the sorts of teams where usually high functioning autistic people, if they were being referred from the GP free of charge because their level of autism they felt was affecting their ability to function on a daily basis, whether it be because of depression, because of whatever the reason might be, all right, the levels of anxiety around certain activities could be starting to affect them adversely, or it could be a trigger. Like in my case, I've been divorced and I went through a really traumatic divorce. I also had a really traumatic health experience in 2020. And for some people, if you're on the high functioning autistic spectrum, specifically, that could create a lot of issues for you. I mean, I managed to deal with these without having to get sort of additional therapeutic support in any way. I managed to sort of deal with this in the way that I was able to deal with it, and still dealing with it, I should add. But not everybody is the same, okay? And so it could be that you've been fine for most of your life, but some sort of life event has triggered such anxiety within you that your levels of rumination have sort of, scaled to a whole nother level or something, or your sensitivities have become so intolerable every time you are going through a grief process, for example, that you've determined that you need some sort of professional help. And in that sort of situation, if you're on the higher functional autistic spectrum, the sort of help you need, you're not going to get it from a sort of, just what I would say regular mainstream therapist service or counselling or coaching. You are going to need a service from professionals who are understanding and have experience of dealing with higher functioning autistic individuals. And at that point, if there's no one specifically with expertise around women in your area, then I actually think that doesn't really matter, because we all got to start from somewhere. And the more women who are on the spectrum, higher functioning, who seek out support for dealing with trauma from professionals who at least have experience in that area, the more it will widen the pool of professionals who will actually develop the expertise to understand and work with high functional autistic women in states of distress and so forth, or trauma. So I think that's important to say. So, I mean, typically what they say, going back to the diagnostic process, is that the diagnostic process typically involves multiple steps, as we know, and may vary slightly depending on the healthcare provider and the region. Initially, a comprehensive assessment is conducted, including a detailed interview about your developmental history, your current symptoms, and everyday challenges. The interview often includes input from family members or close friends who can provide additional insights into your behaviour and history. And that's another important point. How your friends and family have actually perceived you over the years. The psychological evaluations are a key component of this diagnostic process. The assessments may involve standardized tests that measure your cognitive abilities, your language skills, and your social emotional functioning. If you're using a clinician, the clinician may use diagnostic tools specifically designed for autism, such as the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, in brackets, this is ADOS. And there is also the Autism Diagnostic Interview Revived, and in brackets, that is the ADI-R. So these tools help to identify behaviours and characteristics that are consistent with autism. And I think the point to make on this here is that, the further point rather, is that these tools are to diagnose autism, okay? And then what will happen is, based on your responses, they will determine, as much as it is possible to determine, whether you are higher functioning or where you are on the scale, on the spectrum. Okay, so it's not looking anymore at just assessment tools that were geared towards someone who was presenting with traits that were specifically what would have been considered Aspergers syndrome back in the day. Now we're talking about a sort of uniform set of tools that just assesses for autism, but it's able to pick up the degree of functioning and the nature of the functioning that may fit your particular profile on that spectrum. Okay, so I think that's important that I make that point there. During the evaluation, you're likely to find that the clinician will observe you, okay? They're going to observe your behaviour, your communication style, and the way you interact socially. They're going to ask you how to describe your experience, and they're going to ask you to describe your experience across different settings. And so because you're going to be looking at your history, what they're going to be looking at is your school, work and social environments, college, if you went to college, so education environments essentially comes under school. Work would include any sort of work, whether it be voluntary, whether it was an apprentice, whether it was a work training program, as well as employed work. It doesn't matter whether it was for one day or whether it was for 1 month. However the duration, it's always a good idea to have a detailed history as much as you can about all your roles. Things like education and school as well. You will need to think about, did you move schools? How did you cope with that? So it's also about transitions. Have an idea and think about how you transition, because change is very difficult for people on the spectrum, and it can trigger a lot of stress and anxiety. So really important to highlight your sort of, in your journals, when you're doing your back history, think about how did you adapt to the changes where you might have had to change schools, especially in situations where it wasn't necessarily planned for you to change school. It might have been some other trauma that was happening within your family that led to you having to move houses, okay? And therefore that led to you having to move schools. So really important to log those important elements of, or memories, if I put it that way, memories of what you can. Very important. So yeah, so it's important that you are extremely honest, detailed
And
as possible, as if we use our masking behaviors in these situations, that only serves to obscure the true nature of the challenges that we actually face. So, for those of you who may be listening to this discussion or this talk and have not previously listened to earlier episodes 2, 3, and 4, what I have actually described what masking behaviors are, the sorts of things that especially high functioning autistic women have done traditionally through our childhoods and through our teenagers and early adulthoods to effectively compensate for not really having those abilities naturally to socially engage in our various environments where we obviously have to function. So just sort of like to summarize. So masking behaviors is essentially compensatory behavior that we use to hide the fact that we've got this problem, okay? And typically the sorts of behaviors that we have adopted, most of us, is sort of mimicking of neurotypical social behaviors. So, non-autistic individuals, essentially. So we'll do things like initiating eye contact. We'll avoid our usual sort of comfort behaviors like stimming, rocking, and so forth. We'll use rehearsed responses to conversations, prepared in advance. So those are the sort of, just an example of masking behaviors that we really need to avoid when we are going to be talking about the challenges we face when we're being assessed for high functioning autism, and also when we are writing our histories effectively that we can share for the purposes of these assessments, whether it's you're going to go and you're going to do this through self-diagnosis tools, or whether you're going to go as far as getting clinically assessed. Really important to make sure you explain not just the way you mask, but the challenges you face when you're not actually using your masking behaviors. So, moving on to talk about understanding the actual diagnostic criteria. So here, there's essentially, I'm really covering the UK and some, which is very similar to the US as well. So, but here in the United Kingdom, the main the main medical, how would I put it? The main sort of medical Bible, okay, that is used to understand or get the criteria for most mental disorders is called the International Classification of Diseases. It's a sort of professional's manual that is the sort of Bible for this, the psychiatric field and the psychological fields, I would say mainly, because it's these criteria that in the UK they would assess people against, okay? And the International Classification of Diseases has come in different sort of volumes, so to speak. So at the moment, I think it's ICD-11, which started around 2007. And essentially, it spans over a decade of work that's involved over 300 specialists from around 55 countries. Okay, all these specialists are specialists who work with people who have all different types of mental disorders. Okay, and so that's the manual that has been endorsed by the the World Health Assembly effectively for use in the UK. And I think the research took over 10 years, and I think it was published around 2018. The most recent version of the ICD-10. Okay, so that is where, and by and large, you would find the criteria, but it's not dissimilar to what you would find is used in the US, United States of America, and they use what is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. All right, so the DSM. And I believe at the moment, let me just check. Yeah, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. So it's version 5 at the moment of the DSM-5, right? And so in the DSM-5, for example, the criteria really is focused on the persistent deficits in the social communication and interaction, and restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. All right. So that is where the tool, the criteria, that's what is focused on in the DSM and in the ICD-10. DSM-5, sorry, and the ICD-10, they by and large have very similar, they're just, the layout's just different, I would say. All right. But in essence, the what you're looking for, what they're assessing you against is similar, the same categories. All right. And what they do is they are going to be looking at the traits or they call it symptoms, but I'm going to say the manifest traits, all right, that have been present, as I've said, from early childhood. All right. And these traits must have caused some sort of significant impairment in your social, occupational, or other important areas of your functioning. All right. So, sorry. And I mean, social and occupational probably just sums it up, really, doesn't it? Because they are broad. They're the two broadest categories of how we as human beings live our lives on a day-to-day basis. We're either in occupation of some sort, most of us, or if we're not in occupation, we are in our own leisure time, so to speak, time where we are free to do what we choose. Notwithstanding that you're not in any sort of institution, so to speak, because you're in a hospital environment, you're ill, or you are in a sort of detention centre because, obviously we've got prisons and so forth. But generally speaking, most people are operating within those sort of two main areas of their life. So that's what you are going to be assessed against in each of those domains, so to speak. Okay. All right. So in each of those domains, which I said, I'm just sort of summarizing this again because I know it can sound very confusing. So it's really persistent deficits in your social communication and your interaction, and your restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities throughout your early childhood that have caused you significant impairment in your social and occupational life. Okay, so basically that's what it is. Yeah. So the clinicians are going to use the sort of practical tools to do this, to do these assessments. They're going to be pre-categorized, pre-prompted questions, self-questionnaires, checklists, observation exercises, and so forth, that they're going to use and gather and align with these criteria. So obviously all these tools are going to be designed around questions about your behaviours in different areas of your life, in your occupational life, in your social life, when you were a child, when you were an adolescent, as an adult, and looking at those, how you would say that you have been significantly impaired, you know. And I mean, significantly impaired is on a continuum. So obviously, significantly impaired, you can be significantly impaired and be high functioning, as well as obviously being significantly impaired and being severely autistic. So it's important to be aware of that. And that's what these tools would look at, you know. Most of the activities are structured activities, and in social situations they're designed to elicit behaviors related to autism. It helps the clinicians to observe your communication skills, your social interactions, your play and imagination, and the way you would use the materials as well. Like if we're talking about, I mean, I'm focused on, as you know, adults at this point in time, all right? But it's still relevant would be the fact that as an adult, you might need support, and you might be getting support from somebody to help you sort of navigate some of these areas of your life, even as a high functional autistic person, okay? Especially if you have other issues as well. Like you might have other needs, you might have other needs that affect your functioning as well, that are completely unrelated to your high functioning autism, but nonetheless have an impact on your high functioning autism. So if you've got physical illnesses, for example, you know, that's quite disabling for you in another sense, or you have a physical illness that is impacting on your sensitivities, for example, could mean that you require some additional support. So where you have additional support for whatever reason, all right, and it could be educational as well. It could be that you require support with your helping you organise for school, college or work, you know. Wherever you have the need for someone else to support you, part of this assessment will involve you accessing that support. So they will want to observe your caregiver or your support worker or your family member or your friend, whoever it is. They will need to observe you interacting and being supported by that individual, in the sense that they're looking at how they support you with the impairment in what you believe is your high functioning autism, if I could put it that way. So I hope this makes sense, because it is complicated. So they're not actually going to be observing the person helping you with your physical need that you might have, all right, that arises from, say, your health condition. What they're going to be looking at is how this person helps you to deal with the trait, the autistic trait that you believe you have, that is affected by the health need, you know. So that's what they'll be looking out for. And oftentimes there will be structured interviews with your caregivers or anybody that's helping you, and it will really be helpful to make sure that these people are aware that you want to go through this process, and that they're going to be needed to, you know, answer questions as part of a structured interview, observational assessment exercise. They'll be required to be involved in that as well, you know. So obviously you need to share information with them so they have as much details as possible about what they can expect, and the information that will be expected of them also. And this is relevant regardless of whether you are self-diagnosing using self-diagnosis tools, or whether you are actually going for a clinical assessment, because clearly you need to be able to ask other people as part of your self-assessment that you will do about how they perceive the help they give to you during these particular times when they are supporting you around those traits. So, very important. So what else do I need to say about this? Yeah, I think it's really just to sort of emphasize that obviously all these tools, and I think I mentioned this earlier on in this episode, that all these tools are really looking at autism as a whole. And autism as a whole is a spectrum. And so the tools are designed to elicit the types of information they need to determine where they believe you fit on the spectrum, at the high functioning end or the more severe end. That's how these tools are actually designed to support people, you know. So I hope I've kind of explained this as best as I can, because it is a very complex process, and it's a very involved process. But essentially, in conclusion, it's about recognizing the signs of the way your high functioning autism affects you as a woman, and understanding what the diagnostic journey is going to be like for you. In terms of how long does it take, it depends how you're going to do it, you know, and it depends on who's doing it for you, whether you're paying for it, whether it's free from, for example, in the UK, the NHS, because you've been able to identify that as an adult now, you feel that you may have missed out on, for example, you may have gone through university and got bad results and realised that actually this is because you weren't supported in ways that you should have been supported, because you didn't let people know that you had these difficulties in education. Like, executive functioning skills are extremely important in education, well, in every day, but particularly when you're studying, you need to be very organised, and that is something that women with high functioning autism struggle with, is having the organisational skills. You know, they say that women are very good at multitasking. Well, that's a problem for many high functioning autistic women, because of the need to have to plan various executive functioning skills all at the same time. And I won't go into great detail about executive functioning skills now, but essentially they are the ability to plan, to organise yourself in terms of your personal care, in terms of your domestic life, in terms of, you know, so when we're talking about personal care, it just, you know, coordinating what you're going to wear, even just sort of organising bath time, shower time, thinking things through, organisation, planning, you know, these can be problematic for women with high functioning autism, you know, who really have to think carefully in advance and make sure there's plenty of time to organise themselves. And the thing is, things can spiral, because you can get really flustered, and that sort of kicks in your anxiety levels, you know, and then once your anxiety levels kick in, then you start feeling like you're getting brain fog, you know, and before you know it, you feel like, oh, I'm just not coping. This is becoming chaotic, and I just feel defeated, literally, you know. And I would say for us sort of more mature women now, we also have the additional factors of perimenopause and menopause coming on, which in itself can create problems for us in terms of organising our time and our day, and you know, brain fog, quite frankly. So yeah, so it's really important that we are able to, really important that we're able to sort of understand that all this will actually affect our diagnostic journey, in that sense of not realizing till a certain time in your life that you've actually struggled with all these things because of a situation where, you didn't get the best outcomes. Like I just use the example of going to university, say, and therefore you've gotten to the point where you feel, well, no, I need to get help. So in a situation like that, you could probably go to your GP if you're in the UK and get a referral to the clinical team for assessment of autism and higher functioning autism, but that would take time. It would take time. It could take a while for you to get the referral appointment, to have an initial assessment, to a decision whether they would sort of take you on and give you a more thorough assessment, because how it tends to work is that you'll sort of get an initial referral done. You go in for a first appointment, potentially, where you'd be asked a bit about what your problem is, why you wanted to be seen. And then they would need to then plan the exercise of carrying out the necessary assessment for you, and obviously they would need to have access to the right professionals who would be involved in that assessment. And it would very much depend on their workloads and how significantly you are being affected by your own autistic traits that you believe are affecting your life. And so you could find that if you go that route, it takes quite long, whereas if you pay for it, obviously it's going to be not as long by any stretch of the imagination, because you readily find a team of private practice clinicians who would be able to see you and organise your assessment much sooner, And obviously if we're talking about going down the private clinical route, then you're talking about having finance to pay for those services. And I have no idea how much the rates would be for the assessment, but I would imagine you're talking about a few £1,000s at least if you're going down a private route, because there's likely to be more than one clinical practitioner involved. And it's going to definitely be more than one visit, one interview period, because obviously, as I described, you're looking at sort of a structured interview situation of questions, possibly some self answering questionnaires, self-assessment questionnaires, as well as observation assessment, and also involving any caregivers or support workers that have been a part of your life, or your family and your friends who know a lot about you, who'll be able to give information. So, that is, and you might need to save essentially for that. Okay. But in all this, essentially, it really is about planning, and you can get a good idea having the assessment. And we'll talk about this in another episode about, okay, what is the benefits of actually getting a clinical diagnosis, and how does that change your life, or will it change your life? What are the pros and cons of that? We'll do that in another episode. So, sorry if I sounded like I'm all over the place. As I said, I'm trying not to plan too much, because sometimes I want to say things that I think would be important. So outside of my legal career, when I'm sort of talking about a topic that is something I'm quite passionate about for different reasons, I want to be able to express myself in the way that reflects my experience, really, of this condition, I don't want to sort of use masking behaviours on this channel, really. I don't want to do that. I want to be as authentic as I can be and still make sense. So whilst I do kind of give myself pointers, okay, I need to cover this, I need to cover this, I need to cover this, I am really trying to just sort of do brief notes and then talk to this whole experience and my advice or what I understand about the different ways women are affected by high functioning autism. So thank you very much, and please give this video a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It all helps. And please subscribe to my channel, help the channel grow. Share the discussions with females that you may know in your family who you think may be affected by autism, high functioning autism. I really want to talk about so many topics to do with life through the eyes of a high functioning autistic woman who's now in her middle age, having gone through certain traumatic experiences in life that has now led me to reflect and think about those experiences, how they've affected me, what I can share, and how I'm going to move my life forward. You know, how I am taking that lifelong experience of dealing with and trying to cope with both my social and my occupational life, raising a family, having had children, being married, a divorce, having had a serious illness that I've overcome, touch wood, and continue to overcome by graces of God. And plan a future, what I hope to be a bright future for myself. So I hope my talks can be of some use to you, regardless of your age. As a young woman, I think what I am saying effectively can be related to any adult female, or and I mean, if you identify as a female, whether that's biological or through gender realignment or transgender, makes no difference to me. I think as long as you identify as a female, as a woman, as a lady, as a young girl, over 18, I would say, though, my experiences aren't really intended or geared towards anyone who is really still a child, because you're still very much having to develop. And in any event, I don't think any diagnosis of any sort of issue that you feel is affecting you as an adult should really apply to somebody who is effectively under 18, at least in my opinion. So I'm not trying to do that. What I would do, of what I have been doing, is obviously drawing on memories that I have from my childhood that all help shape the way I have dealt with and coped with life hitherto. So that clearly, obviously, I do talk about and cover childhood experiences, but that is not intended to indicate that my talks are going to be suitable for young women who haven't reached the age of maturity at all. So yes, I think for the next one, what I will do is I want to carry on talking a bit more about examples of how the traits specifically that manifest differently in women. I want to sort of give more examples of what these could be, because I really think, as I said in the beginning of this video, I really think it's important that I try to give as many examples from my own experiences that I can recall as well, because I've got so many experiences, honestly, from myself personally, but also from working with individuals that I'm aware of were diagnosed with high functioning autism, particularly when I was in my working in my career as a social worker with adults with mental disorder and with learning disabilities, learning difficulties. And also, as a lawyer, I've had clients, mainly men though, I would say, who clearly fall on the spectrum, but they're high functioning career professional males.